Some killers become so infamous they remain in the popular imagination long after their deaths. Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy. With even the mere mention of these names, certain images of sinister clowns, freakish science experiments, and explosive electric chair executions immediately flood the mind. But today we're going to talk about a serial killer whose memory lives on in a different form. A killer whose legacy has been cemented within a fictional character whom many believe is the devil himself. Charles Schmid was born in Tucson, Arizona on July 8, 1966. He was an illegitimate child who was raised and reportedly pampered by his adoptive parents, Charles and Catherine, owners and operators of a nursing home. Schmid's relationship with his adoptive father, whom his adoptive mother would end up divorcing, was fraught. Other than this and a minor incident of theft from his school's machine shop, there were no red flags that there was something malicious about Schmid, nicknamed Schmidty, whose peers regarded him as intelligent and handsome. At high school, Schmid was a poor student, but an accomplished athlete who excelled on the gymnastics team, even leading the team to a state championship. Upon graduation from high school, Schmid created a new persona for himself and radically changed his image. He dyed his hair black, applied layers of makeup to his face, and drew a fake mole on his cheek. A short man, he stuffed his boots with crumpled up newspapers and flattened cans in order to look taller, and he styled himself after Elvis Presley. As a result, he became something of a local hero to a community of disaffected youth, and many teen girls competed to gain his attention even as he entered his 20s. He gained the moniker the Pied Piper of Tucson, since he was able to influence so many young people around him, like how the Pied Piper of legend lured children out of their houses with the sound of his pipe. He spent much of his time at local teen hangouts on Tucson's Speedway Boulevard, drinking with friends and picking up girls, and when he wasn't doing this, he'd spend copious amounts of time alone. Sheriff Clarence Dupnick, who worked on the case of the Pied Piper of Tucson, once remarked that he's never heard a good explanation of why someone grows up to be a psychopath, unless they're born that way. With Charles Schmid, who lived a somewhat shaky but otherwise fine childhood and adolescence, perhaps this was, indeed, the case. On the night of May 31st, 1964, while drinking with his friend John Saunders and girlfriend Mary French, Schmid declared he wanted to kill a girl, saying he was sure he could get away with it. He chose as his victim 15-year-old Aileen Rao. He arrived at her house in his flashy car, accompanied by Saunders and French. He drove Rao to a remote patch of desert near the local golf course and raped her. He instructed Saunders to do the same, but he could not, by some accounts because he was not sexually interested in women, though perhaps he simply couldn't bring himself to commit the act. Schmid then beat Rao to death with a large stone, and he, Saunders, and French, who'd been waiting in the car listening to the radio, buried Rao in a shallow grave. July 1964, 2 months after Schmid had scratched his sinister itch to kill, Schmid found himself a new girlfriend, 17-year-old Gretchen Fritz, daughter of a prominent heart surgeon in the Tucson community. Fritz was clingy, and Schmid found he could hardly stand her. He decided to break up with Fritz, who, in retaliation, threatened to reveal that Schmid had murdered Rao, something that Schmid had confided in her. As a result, Schmid strangled Fritz and her sister Wendy at his home on August 16, 1965. He dumped their bodies in the desert and, unable to contain himself, boasted of the crime to his friend Richard Bruns, whom he drove out to the desert to see the bodies, which the two of them hastily buried. Schmid covered up the murders by claiming the sisters had fled to California. He drove to San Diego, where he was arrested for impersonating an FBI agent, trying to exonerate himself by claiming to be employed to find the missing girls. Meanwhile, Bruns feared that his own girlfriend was in danger because of Schmid. He ultimately fled to Ohio, breaking up with his girlfriend because her parents disapproved of him. Back home in Tucson, Schmid was married in September, proposing to his 15-year-old bride after a blind date. Bruns finally decided to report Schmid to the police on November 11th, leading to Schmid's arrest. Schmid was sentenced to death for killing the Fritz sisters. He also pled guilty to second-degree murder in the case of Aileen Rao, earning him a sentence of 50 years to life in prison. The death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment 6 years later in 1971, when Arizona temporarily abolished the death penalty. He wrote poetry in prison, sending it to Professor Richard Shelton at the University of Arizona for critiques. On November 11, 1972, Schmid escaped from prison alongside triple murderer Raymond Hudgens. The fugitives held 4 hostages at a ranch near Tempe, 8 at a Sonic, then separated, and both were recaptured within days. On March 10, 1975, Schmid was stabbed 47 times in a prison brawl, and he died from his wounds 10 days later, after losing an eye and a kidney. His body was stolen from the morgue, but recovered by police. His mother, reduced to poverty because of the money owed to her son's legal team, chose for him to be buried in the prison cemetery, fearing his grave would be defaced by the public otherwise. Charles Schmid lives on. In fact, he's discussed in many a high school English class. He was immortalized as the sinister Arnold Friend, a character in the 1966 short story Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? By Joyce Carol Oates. In the story, Arnold Friend arrives at the house of Connie, his latest victim. It's been said by literary critics that his boots that he stands unsteadily in contain goat hooves, and the crazy wig he wears hides his horns. Arnold Friend, an old fiend, if you remove the R's in his name, remains one of the most striking apparent depictions of the devil in literature, and his demonic nature will forever reflect the evil crimes committed by Charles Schmid many decades ago.